How we feeling this morning, River City? Pretty good? You guys look amazing in all that tie-dye out there, and thank you all for participating in Tie-Dye Sunday. If you're a guest in the house, I'm Eddie, one of the pastors, and it is the second Sunday in June, and we are in a series that we've been in for a while now, almost 2 months, entitled, How Then Should We Live? So when do we get that? And this series has been all about the little brother of Jesus, James, and the letter that he wrote to the early church about how we should do life on the other side of the empty tomb, and how important it is for us to understand what Jesus ultimately did for us, and the fact that for Jesus to come to the earth some 2,000 years ago, to go to that cross, to rise from the dead, to be who he said he was throughout all of his ministry, and for us to trust in that, it's going to take some moves that we're called to make as followers of him. And James, Jesus' little brother, was convinced that Jesus was the Savior of the world. He was convinced he was the God of the universe, and he was convinced that his friends in the church needed to be living their lives appropriately, like Christians do, because it's that important. Well, last week, we looked at the value of our words and how we are called to speak well when it comes to the people that we do life with. That we aren't just in a world with random people who don't have value, quite the opposite. We live in a world with unique people who have of the highest value, that we are image bearers of God, that God created each one of us individually, specifically to know God and to be known by God and to have relationships with other people and to say to other people and to speak to other people in ways that aren't appropriate or aren't uplifting. It just, according to James, doesn't make any sense. That we should be speaking well and doing everything that we can to communicate to those that we do life with, but also people that we don't even know yet. When we come in contact with them, we should speak well to them and of them, and that's what we are called to do as Christians. Well, this week we're going to level up. We're actually going to back away a little bit from just the speech that we have with one another, and we're going to look at the totality of life. Because James, and throughout the scriptures, you see this understanding that when it comes to how we do life in this world, we are to not only speak well, we are to also live well. And by live well, I mean that we are to do the day-to-day grind of life with a perspective that comes from God. That we as followers of Jesus have been called to lean in to what God has said to us. And what's amazing is that we have the scriptures. The Bible right here for us that's been preserved for nearly 2,000 years, written over a 1,500-year period of time by 40 different authors in 3 different languages on 3 different continents. And it gives us the words for life and how we should live it well. And within these pages, we find the character of God. We find the nature of God. We find the history of God's people. We find the lengths that which Jesus took to bring us and help us be a part of God's family forever. But we also find within these pages a particular book that we're going to start in this morning. Then we're going to get to this little portion in James's letter, but we're going to start in this particular book because it's so valuable for how we do life day in and day out. And the book we're going to look at just for a little bit is called the Proverbs. You've probably heard of them. And what's amazing about the Proverbs is that it really is. It's a day-to-day how-to on life. It's what is the wise thing for us to do versus the unwise thing for us to do. It was written by Solomon, who was the king of Israel for a few years. His dad was David, and Solomon had some sons. But there was a moment in Solomon's kingdom when he was kind of figure some things out, where he had this conversation with God, and he was basically asked, "What can I give you, Solomon?" God said. And King Solomon didn't ask for riches. He didn't ask for power. He didn't ask for status. He didn't want like a whole continent. What he wanted was wisdom. He wanted the ability to understand and discern what was right. He wanted to see God and who he was and just apply what God would do in a moment. That's what Solomon wanted. And when Solomon wrote the Proverbs, he wrote them to his sons and said, "Hey guys, this is how life should be lived. Hey guys, this is what I want you to take from me, your dad, and put into practice." And what's beautiful about the Proverbs is that it's something that we can keep going back to day after day after day when we have our troubles, because we will. When we have our struggles, because we will. When we're trying to do what's right in God's sight, this is the book that I recommend all of us keep going back to because it's that good. Well, there's a particular passage that I want us to start with this morning that really, I think, sets the tone. It almost kind of encapsulates the whole of the Proverbs. And it's Proverbs chapter 3. And Solomon's writing to his son, and he's wanting him to understand a few things about life. And this is how he begins in verse 1. He says, "My son, don't forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commands. For they will bring you many days, a full life, and well-being. Never let loyalty and faithfulness leave you. Tie them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart, then you will find favor and high regard with God and people. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways know him, and he will make your paths straight. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. This will be healing for your body and strengthening for your bones. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Then your barns will be completely filled, and your vats will overflow with new wine." That's nice. "Do not despise the Lord's instruction, my son, and don't loathe his discipline. For the Lord disciplines the one that he loves, just as a father disciplines the son or daughter in whom he delights." Isn't that good? Isn't that just some good words to hear on a Sunday morning? What I love about this is that this really sounds like a conversation like a dad would have with their kid. Like, I'm now raising 2 teenagers. My wife and I are doing our best. We're hanging in there day after day after day. And what's great is that our kids are, I would say, relatively to more than likely receptive to the teachings that we've been providing them for their entire lives. Now, I know there's some certain family situations where you've got like that stubborn, rebellious kid, and God bless you, we're praying for you. It can be that way. But what Solomon wants his sons to understand is the importance of the instructions of the parent, the importance of the instructions of our Heavenly Father, the importance of us understanding that there is just a certain way to live. And he says right out of the gate, don't forget my teachings. Don't miss what I'm trying to communicate to you. That when it comes to the Lord, we should trust in him and not our own understanding. That we have a God who speaks, who talks to us, who gives us information through his word. And we should do everything we can to trust it over our own just fallible, broke down misunderstandings of the understandings of life. That when it comes to how we see ourselves, that we should trust in the Lord and fear him and who he ultimately is, and not lean into the worldly ways and the evil things of this world, because it will only harm you. Matter of fact, he says, if you will just trust in the Lord, it's like ointment, it's like medicine for your bones, for your body. That there are practical ways in which we do life, and Solomon's talking to his son and saying, hey, there are certain things that you should and should not do that will help you live a long life, a full life. Do those things, apply those things that are good for you. And then he breaks down just the whole like money, greed, possessions thing. He's like, hey, when it comes to God, just honor God with your stuff. Don't make it all about you. There's no need for a Scrooge McDuck in the room. Just trust God with your wealth. Trust God with your stuff. Be okay with what you've been given. Give it away from time to time. Allow yourself to be a generous person. Don't be that guy. And then, of course, toward the very end, he talks about just instructions in general. What we really want, I think, for our kids, ultimately, is for them just to listen. We've been there, haven't we? We've gone through the teenage years and the elementary age years and the pre-K years, and for a lot of us, the older, younger adult years. We've seen some things. We've experienced some things. We've hurt in places, and we don't want that for our kids. Neither does God want that for us. So he's provided for us these particular words for us to read and to live by, because he loves us that much. And right on the other side of this really good teaching, this really good instruction, these reminders that a lot of us, I think we just know. He says this in verse 13, "Happy is a man who finds wisdom and who acquires understanding. For she is more profitable than silver, and her revenue is better than gold. She is more precious than jewels. Nothing you desire can equal her." According to Solomon, wisdom is, it's it. It's the biggest of the best of things. There is nothing better on this planet Earth that you can acquire and hold on to than wisdom. Being able to discern right from wrong and choosing what's right. Because according to Solomon, wisdom is something that comes from God. Wisdom is a gift that he gives to his kids to say, hey, this is how we should be doing life. And if we lean into that, great. there is going to be a better, truly better life for us. Will it be easy? Absolutely not. Will it be good? Yes. Why? Because we're leaning into the God who created all of this, who put you in a particular time on the timeline of life, who gave you the family you have and the body in which you are indwelling. He wants you to trust him with today and tomorrow and the next day and so on. And Solomon's saying, hey, happy are those folks. Happy are those folks who want more and more of this. Because this is what matters ultimately most. It's the richest of the richest things you can hold on to and acquire. And Solomon would know he was the richest person, by the way, on the planet Earth at that time. And some say the richest person to have ever lived. So how does all that wisdom talk so far land with you guys this morning? Because according to James, who wrote his letter about 1,000 years after Solomon wrote the Proverbs, he says that when it comes to wisdom and how we just attribute it and begin to apply it and exercise in our lives, according to James, this is a fight for our lives. This is the fight of our life. That when it comes to wisdom and how we apply it and where we see that it comes from and what we take in as a human, as a person, as someone who's following after God, that it matters that much. So much so that in the second half of James chapter 3, which is where we're going to spend the rest of our time, he begins to communicate this to his friends. Because within the church, there were some problems, like we talked about last week, like they were having an issue speaking well. Well, according to James and the way he kind of sets this up, a lot of these leaders even in the church were having a difficult time living well. They weren't going after God. They were going after the world. They were going after the culture. They were just leaning in and just absorbing all sorts of false information about how to do true life. And James, in typical James fashion, he does everything he can to get the attention of the people that he loves, that he cares for. So let's look at what he says in chapter 3, verse 13. He asks a question. Who among you is wise and understanding? By his good conduct, he should show that his works are done in the gentleness that comes from wisdom. James is kind of asking a rhetorical question, I think, but I really do think as he's writing this out that he wants to know within his churches, do we have any wise people in the house? Do we have any people that are seeking God and doing everything they can to just allow him to lead and guide and direct their steps? The problem with that day is the cultural just clinging on of all the things traditionally. These people were heavily influenced by the Jewish culture, and a lot of them would just hold on to the traditions and weren't leaning into what God ultimately wanted for them to do. How to treat themselves, how to treat God, how to treat other people, how to love well. All the things that Jesus basically had passed down to them through his ministry. These people were like kind of bouncing different ideas off of themselves and living in such a way. And James is like, hey, anybody got wisdom in the house? Anybody care? This is what it looks like. You are to conduct yourself in a way that is gentle. Another way to say gentle is humble, where it's not about you, where you're just kind of happy to be here. You're excited to be a part of the family of God. You're exercising your life in a way that looks a lot like Jesus did during his ministry. Others go first, not about you. You're patient. You're considerate. You're looking out for the interests of other people. You're doing all the things that the Apostle Paul wrote in his letters that we should do as followers of Jesus. And this is what we're looking for. When it comes to wisdom, we want to be those that are absorbing what God has for us and applying it in a humble manner. Because there is a contrast, and James sets this up in the next verse. There is another way James sees the world being played out by, sadly, people who love Jesus. And this is what he has to say in verse 14. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast, don't brag about that and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there is disorder and every evil practice. Well, there goes James again, taking a turn again. He sets it up. He says, hey, this is what wisdom is supposed to look like. And then he says, oh, and by the way, here's what I'm seeing. And if you weren't here last week, this is one of those, wah, wah. Debbie Downer moments where James is giving you some good information, right? And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, and by the way, if your heart is being heavily influenced by what's from below, from hell itself, if you're being influenced by the unspiritual and by the demonic and by the earthly things, if you're not seeking God and you're living your life inappropriately, there are some major consequences that are about to and are probably at work in your life at present. And it's a disruption and a destructive force in the church. James is like, this is chaotic. This isn't good at all, brothers and sisters. This is not how we should be. And he calls his friends that are doing these things, and he really kind of pinpoints a couple of just really interesting words. Bitter envy and selfish ambition. And as I began to think about those words, that's not something that I really communicate often in my normal speech. So as I began to look through what James is saying here in these verses, I began to look at other translations. And one I fell upon was Eugene Peterson's The Message. And I want to read to you what he says about these verses and this type of mentality and this heartbeat as it relates to a wisdom that doesn't come from above where God is. It comes from below, from the demonic. And this is what Eugene Peterson has to say in this verse. So check this out. Mean-spirited ambition isn't wisdom. Boasting that you're wise isn't wisdom. Twisting the truth to make yourself sound wise isn't wisdom. It's the furthest thing from wisdom. It's animal cunning. It's devilish plotting. Whenever you're trying to look better than others or get the better of others, things fall apart and everyone ends up at the other's throats. Have you seen that play out in your life? Have you been a victim of something like that? Have you known someone that has that type of just demeanor? Have you accidentally exercised that yourself? Where you've made it all about you? Where you've had that mean-spirited just understanding of, I'm going to do all that I'm going to do for my own benefit, for my own glory. I'm going to make my life about me. I'm going to put into practice all these things that do not help anybody else. I'm going to see through the lens of just myself. James is saying, no. Not in our church. Not in what Jesus has ultimately laid out for us to do as his followers. This is not how we should live. This is not how we should appropriate what God has done for us. This is not how we should filter out us being followers of Jesus, living in a world that is desperate to know him. Why would we be so overly just overwhelmed by the culture that we're living in? Why would we allow for traditions or for the next new thing to get in the way of the truth of the scriptures? Why would we kind of suffocate the movement of God in such a way that doesn't bring to light what's really going on in the hearts of people, which is they desperately need Jesus. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and we need to be trusting him more and not ourselves. We need to be going about our business in life. We need to be applying all of these truths found within the scriptures in our homes, at our jobs, and every other area of our life that we can. This is what James is saying. That there are two choices. You can go the way of God and live your life in a humble manner, or you can make it all about you. You can have bitter envy, which is basically living your life thinking that God owes you what he gave somebody else. Where somebody has something and you think, oh, no, I should have that at the very least too. Not remembering that God gives you what you can handle. He gives you what you can deal with. He gives the other person sitting next to you what they can handle and what they can deal with. He wants you to be thankful for what you've been given, and he wants them to be thankful for what they've been given. He doesn't want you to want what they want. He doesn't want them to want what you want. He wants for you to be completely okay, trusting in him that he's taking care of you like a good dad does. And when you exercise that envy in that way, you become bitter, sour, off-putting. No one likes you. And we're living in a world where we're called to be winsome. We're called to help people see more of who God is, and we cannot be envious at the at all. Because we have a God who gives us what we need. And honestly, more than that. And we should be grateful and live our lives in such a way as to show that gratitude. But not only that, we shouldn't be striving in our life with selfish ambition. In the Greek, the word ambition doesn't have like a real negative connotation. It's just striving. But ambition in this way, like what James is talking about, makes it all about you. Where you're doing everything you can to step over the next person or the person in front of you to get what you ultimately want. Where you're willing to just cut corners and burn all ethical bridges to get everything you can. And James is like, that's not Jesus at all. It doesn't look anything like the church and how the church should operate in a world that is so overwhelmed by the unspiritual, by the earthly, by the demonic, that we are called to set our eyes on Jesus. We are called to lift our heads up. We're called to seek God and do everything we can to fall into place. Do everything we can to make our lives look in such a way that looks like we have things in order, not disorder. Peace, not chaos. And this is James's warning to his friends. But then he finishes it up, and he says this in verse 17. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without pretense. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. Read verse 17 one more time. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without pretense. Like that's what I want to be known for. How about you? I want to be the guy that is peace-loving and gentle, full of mercy. You kind of just see God's activity in his life. I want to work myself in such a way and spend some time with the Lord enough where I'm less of who I used to be and more of who God has created me to be. And I want that for you. And James wants that for his friends. And wisdom calls us down that type of road. But we have to be willing to walk down it. We have to get out of our own way. We can't make our lives about ourselves. And James is saying, friends, family, wisdom from above, from where God sits. It's pure. It's unstained. And then as a result, there's all these other things that kind of are connected to it. And we begin to seek wisdom from above where God sits. We begin to exercise these things in our life. And when we see and when we apply certain decisions that we make, it has the benefit and just the aroma of these words that James has left for us. And as I was thinking about these words that James left for us, I began to think about some other words. And the first set of words that I thought about was what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount. As he was talking to his disciples and all these people from the religious leaders down to just the common folks that were there that were just trying to see whatever Jesus was saying. He had this to say in Matthew 6:33. He said, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided for you. Therefore, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. We've read this before. We've prayed over this before, I'm sure. And what Jesus is saying here is that when it comes to our relationship with God, we should try to put that, number one. And when we do, when we get him in the right order, putting him as supreme, as the God who created us, and we recognize that without him we are nothing, then we find ourselves on the other side of all the other details in our lives, putting them in a particular order that will just keep bringing glory and honor back to him. It's just going to happen. But it takes practice. It takes practice. It's something that we got to be willing to put into play. We've got to make some choices, choosing God's way over our way over and over and over again, to where eventually it becomes almost like a routine and a rhythm in our lives. Like it's something that we're just almost instinctive to do. And James, when he says that we need to seek wisdom from above, that where it ultimately comes from is from God, and we don't need to be worried about what's going on around us. So much where we're pulling all this influence in toward us from the worldly ways, from the culture that seems to change from what's good to evil and evil to good on the drop of a hat. We need to cling to God. Hold on to the scriptures. Let that be the foundation and the anchor for our souls, because it is. But not only that, what I love about how James finishes up this little section is that he says, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those cultivating peace. Like, there's just something about followers of Jesus when they exercise that right wisdom, when they truly seek the scriptures out and say, okay, God, where do I need to be going from here? How do we be handling this certain situation? What is the next best step for me? He says there is this righteousness, this opposite of evil that is overwhelming the moment, that where we're cultivating peace, not chaos. That we're doing everything we can to try to just make what's really going on in the world around us better. And it reminded me of what Paul said in Galatians chapter 5:22, where he said, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, humility, and self-control. Paul says these things because he's noticed that when the Spirit is moving, these things are present. And when we humble ourselves and allow the Spirit of God to just kind of do what he does, where he just kind of invades, where he takes over a little bit of who we ultimately are, where he begins to manifest himself in ways where we just become more of these attributes, it just has to do with us connecting with God more and more and seeking him over anything else and letting all the other things kind of fall into place. And as I look at these words from James, who was just wondering who is wise among us, who is going to just take steps in being humble, who's not going to be so overly impressed by the world around them that they become so self-centered, so self-absorbed that they couldn't care less about what God has to say about anything. But they're going to begin to exercise a purity about themselves. They're going to find themselves peace-loving and gentle, full of mercy. All the things that I think deep down to the core of who we are as followers of Jesus, we want to see come out of our lives every single day. But it takes practice. It takes work. And as I thought about those two verses, what Jesus had to say, what Paul had to say, and what James has been speaking about constantly, I had this thought come to mind. And it's this: kingdom seekers, they want God most. And because they do, they produce a fruit that has all the qualities from above that make life truly better. Kingdom seekers want God most. It's just true. When we seek God's kingdom, he is our number one priority. And because that is the case, we begin to produce a fruit in us that looks a lot like those lists that I just read to you a second ago, making your life better, not easier. Jesus did not give us these lives so that they would be easy. He gave us these lives so we could go and tell people about him so that they could have the better life that we have on the other side of giving their old lives away and allowing him to give them a new life, a life that is saturated in the love that he only can give us, a life that says, I love you and I did all of this for you. So let's do some things that align with my heart and my ways, so that your lives and the lives of the person next to you, more importantly, will be better, because that is our mentality in Jesus. Jesus even said, I didn't come to be served, but to serve. I didn't come to get all the attention and all the accolades. I came to lay down my life for those that I loved. He was doing everything he could to satisfy the Father, to break the chains of sin. Dude, everything that we get in the way of, we make all about us. Jesus said, I love you anyway. I'm going to make this right anyway. And the least that we can do is begin to realign our hearts and our minds to try to understand a little bit more of where God's ultimately wanting us to go, and then begin to put those little baby steps into practice. This is what kingdom seekers want. They just want more of God. They don't want what the earth has to offer, what the unspiritual has to offer, what the demonic, heaven forbid, has to offer. We don't want that, do we? No. So let's take James's warning. Let's take the good things, because we finally got some good news from James, and I'm super thankful about what wisdom ultimately could look like for you in your life, and let's make the wise choice. Let's let the scriptures be a priority in our lives. I mean, this book is fascinating. I speak about it all the time to all the different age brackets of our church. It has been preserved for you for 2,000 years. It is the same as it was when it was written back then, just in our language. And it tells you exactly what you need to do and not to do in this life, so that we can truly understand how we should be living on the other side of this empty tomb. And my challenge for you is to just pay attention to where your heart is. To trust in God more than your own understanding, and to spend some time in his word so that you can get that good information that'll help you go the right direction over the wrong one. Let's consider these words. Let's consider where we are. Let's consider what Jesus has done for each and every one of us. And let's continue to go out into our world, putting the right foot forward, taking the right steps in the right way to bring honor and glory to God, but not for our own benefit, no, but for the benefit of those around us. This is what the Christians have been called to do for 2,000 years. And next week, we're going to take a look at what even more we are called to do on this side of the empty tomb.